All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started just in the interest of time. So thanks for joining us today. This webinar is part of a three-part series, and the next one that's coming up is on December 16th, which we'll talk a little bit more about, which involves how to sort of document some of your reporting processes. If you're interested in any of the others, maybe you missed it, you can just drop me a line. We have recordings we can share with you. And also, if you sign up for our newsletter, which you can access from our website, then you can always be up to date whenever we have these kind of webinars. So today we're going to talk about visualizing your fundraising data. I'm Taj Carson. I am the CEO of Insider, and Jacob Joseph is our solutions architect. And I'll be doing most of the talking today, although hopefully you all will be talking as well and sort of weighing in and asking questions. And Jacob's going to keep an eye on the Q&A. And so anything that you guys bring up, we can take a look at it there. And please feel free to ask specific questions, like questions that are specific to you. If we can't get to here, we'll get back to you, or we'll get to it at the end. So it'd be great to know kind of what brought people here. But just to tell you a little bit about who we are in case you don't know, we help nonprofits with their reporting, and we help fundraisers to increase the work that they can do with their donors and to bring in more revenue and to improve their donor experience by using data. But one of the things we specialize in is helping people use the data that they already have. So some folks talk about doing different kinds of data collection or using different kinds of tools. We work with whatever data you already collect and whatever tools you already have to make reporting easier for you, so you can really see exactly who you need to target. A lot of times people will have some data in a digital marketing database and some data in a direct marketing system. You'll have a planned giving database, and it's very difficult to pull together that information and figure out if somebody is very active as a digital and direct mail donor, and you might be good to start to cultivate as a planned giving donor, for example. And so one of the things we do is we bring all of that together and put it together into reports that people can use, and you'll see some examples of some of the reports that we've done. So yeah, one thing I would like to say is if you're going to do the chat, just make sure you've got the setting on all panelists and attendees. Sometimes people will ask a question and it'll just go to us, and it's just much more fun when everybody's talking to each other as well, because sometimes somebody will post a question and somebody else in the group will have the answer. So that's also an option when you do that. So just make sure you've got that setting going. So what we're going to talk about today is a little bit about what is data visualization, because it sometimes is more complicated and interesting than people often think it is. Sort of talking about why we use data visualization and when you should do that, how to approach it, some tips on choosing a visualization, a brief conversation on how do you assess a visualization. And then we'll talk a little bit about tools. I think the tools piece is the most complicated, but there's lots of good tools at lots of different levels that you can use. So first off, we're going to start with a little poll. So what is data visualization? There's a lot of different ways to approach it. So feel free to just take a few minutes. I've actually had clients say to me, you know, we'd like you to make this look prettier. And there's certainly nothing wrong with that. But as most of you all are clued into, the real purpose for data visualization is to make the data easier to understand. And this is one of those things that you really want to keep an eye on when you're doing your visualization, because sometimes people will make things beautiful. And I'll show you one later, a visualization that I adore, that it's a work of art, right? But it's really takes a lot of effort to understand. And sometimes that's okay, sort of depending on what you're looking to do. So yeah, everyone got this one, that it is a technique that makes data easier to understand. So what is it? Andy Kirk, if you're not familiar with his work, he's got some great books on data visualization, and he also does some great workshops, and his blog is also wonderful if you're interested in sort of digging in a little bit and learning more. He defines it as the representation and presentation of data to facilitate understanding. So again, this idea of sort of what's beautiful versus the function of it. And we really focus on what the function is and making sure that we can actually understand the data better by visualizing it. I'll talk in a minute about how that works. Scott Murray says it's visual solutions to data-driven problems, right? So it's often nice to think about, like, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is it that you're trying to communicate? Because data can be a little bit of a quandary, right? It's not something that your brain inherently knows what to do with. And it's really often hard to understand kind of what you should lift up and what you want to take away from it, and to really kind of dig in and use it easily. So we at Insider are data nerds, right? There's no doubt about it. Like, we're the kind of people who can just sit down and pore over spreadsheets and tables and everything else and just get a big kick out of that. And it's easier for us to kind of identify the patterns just by scrolling through at that level of detail. But that's not true for most people. So even for people who are super data savvy, this is a very labor intensive way to look at information. And for people who maybe data is not your primary job, but it's a way that you accomplish things, right? Like, so data, you may or may not be sort of the data person, but you're going to want to use that data to figure out who to target, like what your patterns are, where your campaigns are successful, and sort of doing that trial and error, figuring out kind of what works. So one of the reasons you should visualize your data, and one of the reasons we do visualize data, and the reason people like this, is because most people are visual learners, right? So this is just true of how our brain works and how we're wired. So no matter who you are, whether you're a data nerd or not, you're gonna benefit from using good visualization practices. So the reason for that is, if you think about, you know, your brain looking at a series of numbers, or looking at a table, or looking at just a bunch of data, if I put it all out there, your brain would just look at it and not know what to make out of it, right? But when you visualize it,
I don't know if you saw this, but Jenny posted a chat message in the chat that just said, "This is my challenge. I love to dig into the data, but I need to interpret it for the executive directors and present it to the boards."
right, absolutely. So that's a big challenge, right? The data can be really great. And thinking about your audiences too, right? So you've got to be able to present it to other folks so that they can easily understand it, in addition to making it easy for you to understand and know what to lift up, right? So when you present it like this, it's a clear trend, right? If we gave you a bunch of numbers with dates and amounts, you could kind of figure it out, but it would require a lot of work. But when you visualize it in something like this simple line chart, this is from Alberto Cairo. He's another great resource. He's got also several good books. Like, I would say that Andy Kirk and Alberto Cairo are my favorite people for really sort of digging in and reading about and understanding data visualization. So your brain is lazy, and that's okay, but just, it's a good thing to just remember. So if it takes a lot of work for your brain to understand something, it's going to try to come to the easiest possible conclusion, which is not always the most accurate conclusion. Daniel Kahneman has a great book, if you're interested in how your brain works, called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he talks about sort of system 1 and system 2. But the most important thing to just remember is that you're going to try to get to the answer in the easiest way possible. And so visualizing data and doing it using best practices makes it a lot easier to allow someone's brain to take away what you want them to take away quickly and easily without misinterpreting the data. So we have just another little poll. We wanted to know kind of where people are coming from. I might can guess based on the answers to that first question you guys gave, which was so spot on. So some people are just starting out and just thinking about the concepts. A lot of people use Excel, and we're a big fan of Excel and Excel graphics. I'll show you some images of that later. There's tons of work that you can do with that. And they're sort of the go-to for that. And then some people have completely gone down the rabbit hole of programming. So can people just post in the chat like what you're using? Because I'm seeing there's kind of an even break for some folks just starting out, some people who are like the go-to for the Excel graphics, and some who've gone down the rabbit hole. So what are people actually using?
And feel free to unmute too, and just mention it.
Just say it or type it, yeah.
One Excel. You got CRM, HubSpot, and yeah, they have very user-friendly interfaces for some visualizations.
Mhm.
That was from Emily.
Cool.
And Taylor says Google Sheets and Tableau. Ellie says
Mhm.
Power BI. John says Excel and Salsa CRM. Jenny also says PowerPoint with integration to Excel. So,
Nice.
a lot of
Nice.
variety.
So a lot of people are using a lot of different vendor solutions. And one of the things we also see is a lot of people using vendor solutions and then putting them together with Excel, right? To be able to pull out of one vendor solution or multiple vendor solutions and kind of put that information together. So sometimes people are using Excel for that reason as well as the visualization. So the key is to just remember that it's functional, right? So we visualize the data so that we can explore it, so that we can discover truths, so that we can learn from it. And we really want to use these visualizations to help us make sense of the information. So you can combine those visuals with narratives to help you really understand the situation. So, this year, a lot of people are going to be combining visualizations with narratives about COVID, right? And how it impacted a shift towards virtual events or digital marketing and what happened to the gala. And obviously, that context would be a great example of why you might have visuals combined with narratives to help people understand what you're looking at. But the bottom line is like you might visualize the data to help you understand, right? But then you're also visualizing it in order to help communicate information to others. So something to think about often is, does it make it easier to understand? So this is like a really old one. It was a visualization of sort of for readers to understand bar charts. And this one doesn't really help you understand bar charts better, right? But it's still pretty fun. And it's still okay to like the ones like this and sort of say, this is just really fun with like the bar chart and the zebra and sort of tongue in cheek. But it is always good to sort of think about, am I making the information easier to understand? So I also want to stretch you a little bit in terms of thinking about what is visualization. It's not always just charts and graphs. Like this is an example from Car and Driver magazine where they wanted to look at all the different names of cars. So you would normally even think about this as data, right? They're just words, but they do have patterns. And so what they wanted to do was to think about how to categorize all the different ways in which we come up with car names. And they were able to do this with this graphic. If you can imagine a big list of car names, you wouldn't have been able to make head or tail of it. But you start to see some of them sound like foreign words on purpose. Some of them are combinations of letters and numbers. Susie and gobbledygook is one of my favorites, right? Um, and sort of thinking about the words that work like that. And it's just a great example of how you can visualize information and it doesn't have to be a chart or graph. Now this one's pretty advanced, right? You would need Illustrator or some other sort of design tools potentially to do this one because it's static. But you can see that you could sort of sit with this one for a moment and see that the color coding tells you kind of which category it is, and the size of the circle indicates sort of how many cars fit into that particular bubble or that particular categorization. So there's a lot going on here, and it's just a really great way to think about how to bring order to this information that would have just been this really, really long list of car names. So for us, we're going to be looking at something that's a little bit more like this. And so one of the things that we can be thinking about is how do we highlight what's important? So especially when you're trying to communicate, say, to your board or to donors or to your staff, you got to think about kind of what do I really want people to take away? Because again, your brain's lazy. And this is an example where you might say, we really want people to look at February. So we're going to make it a different color. So it's what sticks out immediately. And then in this one, this is using a reporting tool that we like called Metabase. And this one, you've also got some annotation. You've got a hover, which is what this is. But you can see that it makes it really clear that I'm looking at this and what I want the reader to look at is what happened in February. And you can imagine you might have, this might be part of a PowerPoint or slide deck that's part of a conversation. Like we want to talk about what happened in February. Did the big gala happen then? Did we have a really good digital marketing campaign? Did we get a grant from somebody? And so that can also be part of a conversation. but we're letting the brain know what we want it to focus on. So really thinking about what the purpose is of the visualization. And what are you trying to show? So in this example, you've got, oh, this is a clear trend on the left, but on the right, am I trying to show a trend? Am I trying to, like, what exactly would I be trying to show here? You might, on the left-hand side, you might draw a line through that to be clear that you're trying to say we've got a decreasing trend there. So really thinking about, just if you're putting stuff out there, kind of what exactly is it that you want to lift up? What do you want to show? What's the point you're trying to make? Often we'll find that people might just create tons and tons of graphs and charts, and it becomes really hard for the audience to dig through because they're not sure exactly what they're supposed to focus on. If you're the person looking at the reports out of your vendor system, you may have experienced this yourself, where you get a whole bunch of canned reports, but you're like, I don't know which one is the most important if you didn't build them. But then when you're building them, really thinking about, and sometimes it's as simple as moving them to the top of the page, right? When you're in the system, to make sure the ones that you need the most are at the top, but also how you lay it out matters. Sometimes you want to leave it up to the viewer though, right? So if you're the person who's running, HubSpot or your CRM, you don't want it to interpret for you, right? You want to be able to go and look and just be like, just tell me what it looks like, and I'll sort it out myself. So in this case, the $794 average gift, is that good? Is it bad? It's up to the viewer in this case to interpret that, but that might be just fine depending on who is the viewer. Same thing with this one. It's like, clearly something happened in 2017 in April. Do we want to say, is that something we want to say something about? Is it something we want to lift up? Or is it just something I want to be able to take in that trend and then decide for myself, or do further analysis or have some conversations to figure out, what that bump was about, or maybe you already know. So I like to think about every visualization along a spectrum of, am I trying to explain something, or are we just exploring? I say just, are we exploring the data? Like, do we want to put it out there and just let people kind of look at it? And for interactive pieces, this is big, where you might click through and find what's interesting. This one is clearly about Black Americans being killed by the police, right? This is from the Washington Post. And you can see your eye goes from left to right. And so putting that really high bar on the left really makes it stand out. Making it a different color really makes it stand out. And they're clearly trying to make this is not a neutral topic, right? This is not something where you just want to be like, oh, here's some interesting information. There's clearly a point here to be made. This is one that we did a while ago for Ride for the Feast in Maryland. And their motto was always 140 miles, 2 days, one cause. So what we wanted to do is just put together something very simple that they could use to help get people to donate, and to help riders to share with people who had to raise a certain amount of money. I've done it, and raising the money was as painful as doing the ride. So it helps to have some graphs and charts and materials. And so, but what they wanted to do was sort of demonstrate their success, right? So it tells you a couple things: what the ride is, and where it takes place, because it's sort of interesting to think about somebody's going to ride their bike from Ocean City to Baltimore. But then also to show how they have this increasing success. So you can imagine a different kind of story you might tell of fewer donors and fewer donations, and we really need your help. You could go either way with it, but they really wanted to portray the ride as being very successful and get people to sort of get on board with that, because also it could be used to get more riders to do it as well. And really thinking about sort of, what does what I'm putting out there mean, and what are ways in which I can demonstrate that? So this is David McCandless. He does Information is Beautiful. If you've never been to his website, it's just a fabulous place to go and look around. He even did some really fun stuff earlier this year on really positive data on things that were getting better, because everyone was having such a hard time this year with all of the news and the data about things getting worse and worse. And so he's like, let me put together some data and show that some things that are getting better. So he's great to peruse. So I've got this big orange block, right? 3.3500 billion, right? It's the US federal budget in 2010. So what am I trying to say with this? Like, I don't know, it's a big orange block. But when you put it together with this tiny little dot that shows the $100 million budget cut that was happening in 2010, now I get it, right? So just this contrast. But clearly he's making a point. that, you know, he wants people to get a sense of perspective on this one about how much is $100 million budget cut. So I'm going to talk you through sort of 8-ish principles of communicating through data. And again, as we're going along here, please feel free to ask questions or make notes of your questions. We can answer anything at any point, but also at the end, and we can answer fairly specific questions too that people might have. But these are just some things to think about as you're visualizing your data. What is the question that you're answering is a great place to start. I cannot count the number of times that I will be talking to a client. I had somebody just the other day and they're like, can you do sort of a really cool scrolly telling thing for instead of a report, we want it to be on a website. I'm like, well, what is it? Why is it scrolling, right? Like, what is the purpose of the scroll? Like, is there a narrative that we're leading people through? Like, are we trying to sort of reveal certain kinds of information at certain times? So people will sometimes see something that looks cool and they'll just be like, can we do an infographic? And I'm like, well, maybe, but what questions are we trying to answer here with this? So you might have questions related to what event earned the most money, right? And that would influence how you would visualize events and income and types of events, right? So you would say things like, do you want to look at a specific event, or you want to look at categories of events and over what time period? You might be looking at who should we be reaching out to, and then you're going to want to dig in a little bit on are we talking about reaching out to people digitally? How would we know that we need to reach out to someone? Are we going to try to identify who has given in the last 30 days and we want to follow up with them? Or are we just going to look at people who've been responding to our social media posts and reach out to them to be first-time donors? Really kind of clarifying those questions really helps you to figure out what to visualize. And, you know, which campaign did better? So, you know, are you going to compare digital campaigns to digital campaigns or direct marketing? Or do you have the same exact annual giving campaign that you do every year and you want to compare year over year? So just being specific about what do I want to know and how am I going to think about these things helps you know what data to pull together. This one seems obvious, but you would be surprised how often, like, this is a big hurdle, right? So getting clean, complete data is the place, you know, you have to know what question, right? And then you have to know, do I have the data to answer the question? Is the data clean and is it complete? And we've got several blog posts that we've done, as well as webinars that we've done on how to clean data. And we've done stuff on how to clean data in Excel, but Jacob also wrote an excellent blog post on data cleaning tools. So if that's something that you're interested in, because it really is, you can't have data visualization without data. And a lot of people try to visualize data when they haven't kind of gotten the data in order, right? So those are great resources we have.
I'll tack on to that too. If you do have, you know, look at our blog and look at our, you know, our content on that. But if you do have data cleaning problems that, you know, we don't have content about and you want help with it, or you want, you know, there to be a blog post, let us know. And we're more than happy to kind of use that feedback to develop our future blog posts and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to know kind of what people are struggling with or what they're curious about that we might be able to help with.
And there's also a message on the chat from Jennifer. She says, yes, what happens when you don't have great historical data but need present figures? And it is, and she says, I think it's a different webinar, but it's relevant because you can't get to that visualization piece if you don't have the data. It's like,
yeah, I mean, you really, in terms of a visualization question, you have to just work with what you've got, right? So you might choose a few indicators that you do have historical data on, or you might choose to visualize the current data and then just have a clear plan moving forward. So how you'll visualize that going forward. But if you don't have good historical data, yeah, you can't visualize a trend accurately without good historical data.
You can add estimates. So if you have a partial data set and you have a rough estimate or you have an idea of what it was, you can add that, but you just have to be very clear about annotating this is estimated versus this is actual. And that's the normal terminology, is estimated or you know, estimated budget, some sort of estimate, and then actual to indicate this is the real thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the data have to be ideally complete, right? And so that's one way in which it's not complete, right? You don't have good historical data. It may not be complete because you don't have all of the information you need about that campaign or that donor. The other way in which it can sometimes not be complete is because you've got things stored in different places. So we see a lot of siloed data that's stored in different vendor systems, like I was saying before. So sometimes for the data to be complete, you just need a method for extracting the data from different places where you track different donors or different information, and doing a data integration to kind of pull that together and then get the data you need to actually visualize everything. So for example, if you wanted to see um, which type of campaign raised the most money, you need to be able to get data from each of your different types of campaigns and put it into one place to analyze it. So also sort of thinking about experimenting with different ways to answer it. So if you have the question and you got the data, thinking about, what kind of a visualization, and I'll talk in a minute about different kinds of visualizations and choosing one, but what really answers that question best. So certain kinds of visualizations answer change over time better than others versus a parts to whole, and over what time period. And the time period might be, when do we have the data for that, but also sometimes, like this year is going to be really tricky. So people will make decisions going forward about, how do we include 2020 as we're looking at trends over time? Like, do we sort of just annotate it, or do we leave it out because it's not going to help us make a decision, because hopefully no other year is going to be quite like this one has been, right? And then also making decisions about whether you're graphing numbers or percentages or percent change. So those are some different kind of things you want to think about. So in terms of like how you want to do this, you want to really work with your brain, again, because your brain's a little bit lazy. And also you just want to use the way your brain works to your advantage. So people sometimes look down their noses at simple things like bar charts, right? But the reason bar charts are frequently used, they work really well. Like, bar charts really do a great job at telling you how much over time, and differences between different groups or different categories, because it uses length, and also sort of two-dimensional position is the other thing. So the easiest ways for your brain to understand information is using length and 2D position. Like, you can clearly see the length of those different lines and the changes in position. So when you get to width, it would be hard for me in this middle column to tell you if that bar is twice or 3 times as wide as the other bar, right? I can see that it's wider, but it gets very not precise. Same thing with size. So there's a whole discussion that goes on about using circles for visualizations. Like, we love to do it, but it's hard for our brain to understand the difference quantitatively between one size circle and another size circle. Same thing with intensity. I can see it's different, but not how different. And then orientation, shape, and enclosure, you can see the difference, but there's really no quantitative ability for your brain to tell how much that angle is, or obviously with the shapes and enclosures. So, the reason that these things like points and lines and bars work really well is because they use those principles. So they're a great place to start. And when you start seeing fancy things, it may actually, you really got to think about, like, does it make it easy for me to understand the information? The other thing is, of course, faithfully representing your data. So the thing that you'll see a lot is problems with the axis. So on this one, it looks like there was huge growth in the annual gala revenue from 17 to 19, but actually like a much smaller increase. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but when I look at this slide, the numbers are there, right? It's not the 35% to 39.6%, but what my brain immediately says is that's a big jump. Then my brain will read the number and go, oh, and look a little bit closer. But if people aren't committed to taking that effort, then you're just going to assume like, oh, that's a big change, right? So this zero axis is a really big deal. I think most people are figuring that out. It used to be something that was less commonly known. But every once in a while, a canned report will spit something out without a zero axis, or you'll see somebody present something, and it's just a good thing to really, really keep an eye on, because it's not intentionally misleading necessarily, but it is, people will call you out on it.
And I'll add a funny note about that one. Excel actually changed its defaults a couple of years ago, or actually it's more like 5-10 years ago, but it used to be the default. It was not a zero axis, and now it defaults to a zero axis.
Excellent. So then tailoring it to your audience. So, and Jacob, I'm going to ask you to tell me what these are because you built this. So this is one that we built for a fundraising client. and they wanted to be able to see these different segments, right? So one is what moves management, and what's the MG?
I actually don't remember at this
We
point. It's a
can't
while
remember
back for
either.
me. But
So my
those were the
point is,
code for their segments. Yeah.
yeah, they're codes for their segments, and they know these segments really well, right? So we talked to them about spelling it out, which would help us right this second. And they're like, no, no, don't spell it out. Don't waste the space. We know exactly what, like, they know this in their sleep. So the audience for this was a fundraising consulting agency. So everyone using this was within the agency, was creating the segments, and was using these codes all the time. Right. So this is a thing where you really want to tailor to your audience in terms of, do they understand what the information means? Still using basic good principles though. And this is a way in which you can use a stacked bar chart to get a fair amount of information in there in a way that your brain can understand pretty well. Okay, so apologies to my colleague who made this, but but she'll forgive me. This is on a project we were working on, and someone who wasn't a visualization specialist created this exploding pie chart. And to her credit, it's a really difficult, this is not fundraising, this is a very complex thing to present, right? It's a randomized controlled trial study in a healthcare setting. And you've got certain people who are sort of eligible to enter the study. And then you've got certain people who are like in progress versus they dropped out. And then the third one is, what was the outcome for those people who had their case actually closed? So there's a lot of information here. And also it's a real challenge when you've got a large, so you might have something where it's like, we've got a large group of people that we sent a mailing to, this many people responded, and of those, this many people donated, and
And
these are
yes,
the characters.
Ginny just asked, is this read from left to right? And yes, it is.
Yeah, it is
But
read from left to right. Yeah, and that's a good point. It's like the default is always going to be left to right and top to bottom. So if ever you're presenting something and it goes the other direction, people are going to get confused. So yeah, you should
if,
always go left to right and top to bottom.
if you have a complicated chart like this and you don't have the option to change it, you can just annotate it though. So you might, if it's not clear how to read it, which this is a very hard one to read, you might add arrows or annotations and say, start here, just like you would on like a wayfinding map in a mall or something.
Hmm.
That just anything that using familiar kind of signposts that people are used to is really helpful.
Yeah,
And
so you could do a little wayfinding on this one.
and yeah, Jenny just said, funny, I read it the opposite way because the color was on the right and it
That's a
grew to
great,
the left. And that's
that's a great point. The color in particular, because your eye goes immediately to color
and
first. So that
Jennifer did
totally
too.
makes sense.
Same deal. Yeah, your eye gravitates to it. So yeah, that's where you start. Yeah.
So we're trying to talk them into going from this to this. So I'm going to use that information in my conversation next time. So this is really the same information, right? It would need some more annotation, right? The legend on the previous one, the key is important, right? But the stacked bar chart kind of does the same job, right? So in this case, I think it's clear that you go from left to right. The
And John
right isn't,
says this is
you
much
want,
better already. So
I know,
people
doesn't
already
it make
like
your
it
brain
more.
hurt? The
Yeah.
previous one makes my brain hurt a little bit. Yeah, this is a really nice sort of reframing that one of our illustrators did. Nigel Houghton did this one, and he's really good at that. And he's helped us with a lot of visualizations for this project, where we're going to like a larger group of people who shrank and shrank and shrank based on dropouts or other sort of ways that they wended their way through the study. So yeah, so in this one, it's much easier. There's still complicated concepts that require annotation, right? Because what does navigation mean? And things like that. But that's really kind of specific to that study and understanding that study. But yeah, it's the same information just portrayed two different ways. And again, bar charts for the win. They just work well.
And also Taylor mentioned it's more clear because it doesn't have the number labels. And I think that's a good point too, because the pie charts are really confusing because they show percentages and they don't necessarily add up the way you think they will. So
Yes, it's true. It's true. And the other thing I'll talk about on pie charts in a minute is like reading the difference in angles across different pie charts is almost always impossible for your brain. So when in doubt, less is better, right? So as you saw with this piece as it went through, it doesn't matter what tool you're using. We do it all the time in Excel. We do it in Excel, we do it in the interactive reporting tools we use. You always sort of take out anything you don't absolutely need in order to understand the data. So even grid lines, you really need to think about grid lines and if they're helpful. Sometimes we lighten them up, sometimes we'll do them alternating, we'll just change the spacing on a grid line. Sometimes you don't need the X and the Y axis lines. These people at Dark Horse Analytics were trying to say something about bacon, but I'm not quite sure what. But yeah. So the other thing I would say, this is my sort of 8-ish, 8.5-ish, is if you can do it, I recommend, if you can do it, and if you're repeating your reports in a regular basis, I really recommend a style guide. We developed a style guide for, we've done it for a few projects that we work on, because you've got decisions that you have to just make again and again and again. And this is a perfect use of a pie chart, right? Because it's showing the different colors. So you might have a shaded graphic. So you might have a stacked bar chart with different shades in it. And this shows you sort of which shades that you want to use. We later went on to develop this and elaborate on it where different colors had different meanings. So that whenever we used this color, it always meant digital marketing. Whenever we used that color, it always meant the direct mail campaign. And this color was always an event, right? So it's a way to just make it really easy for your brain to look and be like, I know what I'm looking at. The really big savings internally was time.
Jennifer just asked, is a single color pie chart with shades easier to understand than multiple colors?
It really depends. If you're using shades, you just need to make sure the shades are different enough that you can differentiate them. When you start to use multiple colors, you start to end up looking like, magic markers just threw up on the page. So you have to be kind of careful about having too many colors. So it's really what makes a pie chart easier to understand is having less than 5 slices. So 5 is even pushing it. And then just making sure there's a clear distinction between the slices. So that could be just having enough contrast between the shadings, or it could be different colors. And then the other thing that you may sometimes have to do, especially if you're dealing with low vision, is you may even have like a white line or a black line in between to differentiate it. It's not as attractive, but it can be easier to read. So we used a style guide because we just didn't want to have to keep making the same decisions again and again and again. So now we know if we make a bar chart for this project, this is the font we're going to use. The axis titles are going to be centered. The numbers are going to be 10-point open sans bold. It just tells us which font and what size, and that it's bold. So in this way, it just keeps you from making decisions again and again. You just go to your style guide and you're like putting together a bar chart. This is what it should look like. It also makes it much easier for you to hand off bar charts for somebody else to prep for a presentation, because you can say, this is how it's going to look. So that's always a good idea. So how do you choose a visualization? So sometimes you can just use simple numbers. Sometimes it doesn't really have to be fancy. Like this is one sort of showing the number of people served and engaged. It was a part of an infographic that we did that was just a way to kind of show progress. And all they really need to know was like the overall numbers were all that were needed. Line charts are great for showing change over time. And there's going to be some very interesting line charts this year coming out. And that's, again, it's really simple. It uses the ways in which your brain can understand it. And you just do want to make sure that you're using an axis that works, and that the time, for example, in this one is clearly delineated. And in this one, you can use different colors, where we use different colors to indicate different years. But you can imagine also this line chart, let's say all you wanted to look at was 2019, you could make all the other colors gray and make 2019 a color, whatever it is. And then that would be telling the reader, that's what I really want you to focus on.
And that's one of the most common patterns that I see and use myself, is a neutral kind of whitewash or gray wash for everything, and then one single color for like the focal point. It really makes things pop.
And it's super easy to do no matter what you're using. Like it's something that you can do for almost any tool. So bar charts are always great, and stacked bar charts can actually tell you a lot of information. So this one's like out of 100%, right? And you can just clearly see that the changes in people who donated and didn't donate over the years. That's still a bar chart. This is my favorite bar chart. So, even looking at our fun cheese bar chart, you can see that people are eating less processed cheese and more cheddar and mozzarella. And I think this is also courtesy of Andy Kirk, and it's based on actual data. So yeah, pie charts, we talked a little bit about those already, but like if you look at the one on the left, it's really easy. This is from UC Davis. It's really easy to see the male-female percentage. The one on the right, it's very difficult. And the reason for that is you've got the color issue, right? So many colors. But the bigger issue with that is it's really hard for your eye to perceive the angle, right? So I've got to understand the difference. I've got to visually be able to perceive the difference between 19% and 27%. And then as it gets smaller, it gets even harder. So that's the real challenge with a pie chart and having too many things in there. This one's a nightmare for a variety of reasons. So, but you've got 3D. So you've got all the different ways in which your eye has to orient to those angles. And then the whole thing is on an angle. It's just a mess. So please don't ever do this one.
And I'll add to that a little trick to use is if it's easy to sketch or draw it, then it's easy for your brain to interpret it. If it's difficult to sketch or draw, then it's difficult for your brain to interpret it. So trying to draw these two would be really hard. So it's probably going to be hard to interpret it as well.
Yeah, like if you need perspective and an art degree to draw it, yeah, no good. You can also see one of the big problems and things you really don't want to do with pie charts is, and this one is not a comparison, right? This is income and how the donation was put to work. But when you have to compare, people will put two pie chart next to each other for comparison. So they might have a pie chart of a breakdown from something from 2017 and one from 2019. It's really impossible for your brain to look at that angle and then look at another angle next to it and a different pie chart and compare those. That's definitely better for a bar chart. And sometimes just don't use a pie. Some people hate pie charts and they think you should never use them for anything. I don't feel that way. I think as long as it's sort of simple, you're good to go. This was the favorite. This is the one that people love to hate from the 2012 because yeah, it doesn't add up to 100. So there's that. All right, tables are really great. Right? Like this is a way to look at information. It's a way to understand things. So sometimes you really do need a table. This one we did a whole series. It was for grants and funding that a foundation wanted like a summary of, and we just color coded each geographic area where they committed funding in different colors and then just did some really clean tables. So don't underestimate the power of a table, especially if it's simple. It can get you a level of detail, and sometimes that's what you need. And then plots are pretty fun. Again, your brain can interpret these pretty easily. This one is built in R by Keith McNulty, and you can look at change over time, and you're using the aspects that your brain, length and position that your brain can actually understand easily. So the one thing I'm going to say about maps, and I'm going to move us along a little more quickly here because I want to make sure that we have time for questions, is sometimes people want to do a map because geography is in some way involved, but it's not always the best use of space. So if I want to know what our donors in each state, how many people donated from each state, and we have donors in every state in the union, right? That's really totally fine as a bar chart. Like you could do a small multiples with a bunch of little bar charts and you could rank it from highest state with the most donors to state with the least, or highest percentage, or based on population, or however you want to look at that. And it would take up way less space than a US map. So really make sure if you're using a map that where actually matters. So this one is one we built about college readiness programs and where they were located in New York. But it was interactive and people actually needed to be able to find their neighborhood and click on it and see the drill down of all the programs in their neighborhood. So where was very important. This was totally an appropriate use for a map. This one's also great. It's one of my favorites because it's super simple, but it tells you something, right? You can totally see land and highways, right? And you can see that where there is the color is further away from the blue, like more towards the orange, that's where there's fewer highways, right? But the where matters there, right? Because you're going to want to look at your state and kind of see how is my state, or like where is this happening? So that can actually matter. So a note on interesting formats, right? You'll see, I know Power BI can produce these and Excel can too. Usually you don't need these. And I'm I think for you guys mostly you're not going to need these. They're really hard to interpret. Um, Sometimes you'll have a data set that's super complex and you'll have an audience that's super committed to taking the time to really understand and pull it apart. But in general, it's probably not a good idea unless you have a really, really good reason and it's the only way to communicate the data the way you want to. This one is the example I talked about earlier. This is from Stephanie Posavec. It is hard to interpret. There is tons of information encoded in here. It is a visualization of part one of On the Road by Jack Kerouac, right? This is not designed to, influence anyone or take on any big issues. It's really a piece of art, right? This is like beautiful data art. I love this piece. You can really take time sort of looking at the different nodes and how she color coded different things he was talking about, and even the word count is even coded in there, but you really would need to take some time to really dig into it. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong with it. It's just a different purpose than when you're really trying to communicate things at a high level and help people make decisions. Like you're not going to really make decisions on this. You're just going to enjoy it.
And
So
John said maybe it makes sense for whatever Jack was on when he wrote On the Road.
that is 100% possible. So 3 things to think about when you're assessing a visualization, either one you created or one that you're looking at that someone else created. Is it trustworthy, right? So trustworthy often has to do with the source. And you'll see this in the news a lot, right? So like you want to make sure it's a trustworthy source and the data that came from a trustworthy place. Is it accessible? So there are issues. There is a whole topic on accessibility in terms of low visibility and 508 compliance, but more generally, I just mean, can people understand what you're trying to present? And this is where the 3D and the really complicated things, they become very inaccessible. And then I like the third one, sort of, is it elegant? And then this is where, pretty is not irrelevant, right? Is it elegant? Is the information displayed in the simplest way possible? So it's nicer to look at, but that's also better for your brain when it's elegant and as simple as possible. So just a brief word about tools, but I'm not going to spend too much time on this because I think you guys are using vendor tools that'll mostly do this for you. So Excel, I will say Excel can probably do a lot more than you think it can. So this is from Excel, and we created this, and we do a lot of things like this. And so just because you're using Excel doesn't mean you're stuck with sort of the defaults. And I would highly encourage you to, if it's a tool that you use for visualization, to kind of go beyond the defaults. The defaults are usually horrific. And this is even more. You can do a little bit of hacking with Visual Basic and stuff to get something like this, but this came right out of Excel. It's really customizable. It's great for your static charts, and you just kind of have to know how to find what you want and use the principles. Like when you use solid data visualization principles, you can get some very nice things out of Excel. So when do you want to go beyond Excel is in terms of strictly a data visualization tool, right? So all of your things, like all of your CRMs, your Razor's Edge, your HubSpot, they're going to have visualization built into it. But when you want to do your own, if you want to do a lot of exploration of data over time, if your data is coming from several different sources, right, you might want to go beyond. You might use Excel to bring it together, or you might use a data warehouse. But if you've got data from different places, you're going to want to go beyond that. Or if you want something interactive, right, like a dashboard, something you can refresh online, something where you can have different views for different users, or you can actually have too much data for Excel to be able to handle. Jacob, do you remember what the cutoff is for Excel in terms of how to tell if you get too much data, or you just wait till it gets sluggish?
The true technical cutoff is much higher than the practical one, which means Excel can actually handle significantly larger data sizes than most people's computers can. So the limitation is often your computer using Excel, not Excel itself. But Excel, I want to say it's like 5 million by 5 million cells, something like that. Yeah. It's pretty big.
Yeah. So some of you might be using Tableau. It's great for exploring. It's really actually great for exploring your raw data, for exploring and cleaning your data. It's a good tool for that because you can really kind of see what the patterns are and where things are missing or where you might be in trouble. as well as doing really great charts. I mean, it's designed as a dashboarding tool. This is a piece by Adam McCann, which I really like because he really makes something beautiful out of Tableau that doesn't look like what you think would normally come out of Tableau. But again, he does a great job sort of color coding and accurately representing this data about the kinds of things Trump tweets about. This is an older one, so I'm sure he's tweeting about different things now. And also good for sharing information online. Tableau is very license dependent. So what you can do with Tableau really depends on what kind of license you have. Microsoft Power BI, you all are probably familiar with that. Pretty comparable to Tableau. This is an example. This is just a screenshot from Metabase. Metabase is one of the open source reporting tools that we really like. We often use that for our builds, and it's very user friendly and flexible, but it requires a higher level of technical skills. It's not like Tableau or Power BI. And then this is just an example of something where you might need somebody who knows graphic design tools. So this one was made in Illustrator. You saw a snapshot of this earlier, where you want to create something like that. So that's going to be more Illustrator, and it's just going to be static, but you have a lot more flexibility about exactly how you want to represent information.
Oh, and then John asked, what was the Microsoft? Oh, they call it Power BI. I'll post a link.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Power BI, I think, is only for internal use. Isn't that right, Jacob? You can't publish it?
No, it's Microsoft, so licensing is tricky. Yep. So if it's just for you internally, just one person exploring, you can actually probably get a free license or free trial. If you want to share it with people in your organization and they already have a license, it's probably also doable. If you want to share something publicly or put it in your website or something, it's going to be very expensive.
Although they do have special pricing for nonprofits, so you can always
That's
talk to the folks at TechSoup about that.
That's a good point.
So once you get to a certain point, I think for most of for tweaking the standard reports that you get and the stuff that's in Excel, or even for having better reports using your CRMs, I think you can sort of teach yourself how to become the data visualization specialist you need. Just learn best practices and get sort of, the 80% of stuff that really just makes it, the 20% of stuff that makes it 80% better, rather. But then you have to decide sort of when do you need to use one. And if you're going to go to more advanced tools, then you might need a data visualization specialist. And then the coding languages, a couple of people I think said that they'd gone down the rabbit hole of coding, but I'm not sure they told us which languages they were using. So you can't always use some of the online coding libraries. You can use like D3, you can use high charts, there's a ton of things, especially in the open source space. This particular one is from Nathan Yao. He's also really, really fun stuff, really great website, and some good classes as well that he gives. So that is it for us. I want to leave a little bit of time. So I will say, this is Nathan Yao's website. If you want to really up your game on your Excel visualizations, John Schwabish teaches, he has his policy Viz blog post, which has really great things. But he also teaches courses occasionally, which are super helpful. We work with him sometimes when we want to really take an Excel graphic to another level, or we want some new ideas. He's very good. He also works at Urban Institute. And then Nathan Yao has a lot of good information, and he's really great at more of the sort of coding type work. So in terms of us, we regularly send out information on cleaning data, integrating data, things to help with visualizing and using fundraising data. So we do that in our mailing list, which we send out something once every week or two. And sometimes we also throw in some really fun data visualizations that we are liking. And that's also where we post about webinars like this. So we've done several webinars this year on a variety of topics. So if you go to our website, you can join our newsletter. You'll get a pop-up right there, or you can just email us and let us know. And you can also follow us on social media, and you can get to all of that from our website. The one other thing I'd like to say is, if you go to our website, there's a schedule a free consultation button, and we will meet with anyone for free for an hour. And I almost guarantee you that we can figure out your whatever's blocking you on your reports. We can figure out what your bottleneck is in just that one session, because that happens pretty much every time. So if you have anything you're struggling with in terms of your reporting, or your data, feel free also to go to our website and book a consultation with us. You can get either or both of us, and we'll help you kind of talk through and make recommendations for where to go next, and help you with anything that you're stuck on. So yeah, I'm going to open it up. Go ahead.
Jennifer just asked, is this the first in your series of 3 you mentioned? If not, how can I get the others? So just reach out to Taj, and Taj, go ahead if you want to answer that.
Yeah, no, just reach out to me and let me know. And you will all get a follow-up of the video for this. Like, people who signed up for this one will get the recorded video after this. And then there's another one on December 16th. And I can also send you the one that we did previously a couple of weeks ago.
And can they just reply to that email with any questions they have?
Yeah, absolutely. You can totally just reply to that. It'll come from me. And the one we're doing on December 16th is really interesting, because anyone who is doing reports regularly, you're probably repeating reports with just different groups or different years or different time periods, right? And Jacob's going to do a session on December 16th about how to document your reports. So by documenting the steps that you take when you analyze your data and create reports, it makes it really easy to save time. Because I don't know if you're like me and you've slept since then, you leave a step out or you forget exactly what steps you did. And by really documenting that, the first time it takes more time, but then after that, it will save you time every time you create a report. But the other thing it'll do is, if you want to delegate and have someone else help you with reports, or you've got, turnover and somebody else is going to be taking those over, it's a really great tool to be able to give somebody so that they can create the reports just the way that you did. So that's a huge time saver. And that's the one that we're going to be doing on December 16th. So does anybody have questions? Either chat, or you can just talk, because, you can unmute and just talk if you have any questions.
And I did see one question from, looks like Jenny, yeah. So we will, in the follow-up email, we'll post all the links that we put in the chat box as well.
Yeah. Also, does anybody have any thoughts about topics they'd like to see in the future? Are there any other webinars you'd like to see next year?
Hi there, this is Jenny, the one who's constantly pinging you guys here.
Hi, Jen.
One thing that I think would be really interesting is for nonprofits, annual reports are taking on a whole new level of, nobody's printing, everybody's doing something interactive. I'd be curious to see how nonprofits present information in annual reports moving forward.
Okay, great, thanks.
Maybe something on like data cleanup and normalization, and kind of how you get sort of junky data into better shape.
Cool. Yeah, we can also follow up with you on the one we did earlier this year and share that recording with you as well.
Great, thank you all.
Sure. All right, everybody, it's 12 o'clock. If you have any other thoughts, you want to just email us with ideas, feel free also to book a consultation if there's anything you want to talk through with us. And otherwise, you'll get a follow-up, and hopefully we'll see you on the next webinar.
Take care. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.